The book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, offers us far more than just a timeline of events. It gives us a profound glimpse into humanity's journey, one that moves from chaos to promise, from destruction to hope. In the beginning, we see a perfect creation, quickly followed by humanity's downward spiral, where poor choices lead to a cycle of self-destruction. From the fall in Eden to the Tower of Babel, we witness humanity's rebellion and the widening distance between man and his creator. The Tower of Babel stands as a climax of this disorder. Humanity, united in selfish ambition, seeks to build a tower to the heavens independent of God. But this pride only results in confusion and dispersion, a reflection of how human arrogance distances us from the divine purpose. Yet even in this chaos, it wasn't the end. God, in His infinite wisdom, prepares a new beginning, a new journey to restore creation to its original intent. And He chooses one man to be the foundation of this promise. This man is Abram, later known as Abraham. God's promise to Abraham was bold: through you, all the nations will be blessed. This was the start of a new phase in the relationship between God and humanity. God wasn't just promising descendants to Abraham, He was setting the stage for the restoration of all humanity, a renewed hope. This promise echoed God's desire to bring humanity back to the purity of the Garden of Eden, to what had been lost. But this new covenant wouldn't come without challenges. The family of Abraham, chosen to bear this blessing, was far from perfect. In fact, they were deeply flawed. Take Abraham, for example. Despite his faith, he made significant mistakes. Twice, he put his relationship with his wife Sarah at risk by denying she was his wife out of fear. And Sarah, impatient with God's promise, urged Abraham to have a child with her servant Hagar, which only led to further conflict within the family. As they grew older, it seemed impossible that they would have a child of their own. But then, miraculously, Isaac was born, the son of promise. Isaac, in turn, had two sons, Esau and Jacob. And once again, sibling rivalry takes center stage. Jacob, the younger brother, tricks his blind father Isaac into giving him the blessing meant for Esau, the elder. Jacob's deceit reminds us of a recurring theme in humanity, our tendency to pursue our own selfish goals, even at the expense of others. After stealing his brother's blessing, Jacob flees, continuing the cycle of dysfunction. As the story progresses, Jacob himself has 12 sons, and one of them, Joseph, becomes the favored son, causing deep resentment among his brothers. Out of jealousy, they sell Joseph into slavery in Egypt, seemingly ending his dreams. But in a surprising turn of events, Joseph's fate is transformed dramatically. In Egypt, through a series of incredible circumstances, Joseph rises from a prison cell to become second in command, ruling over all of Egypt. When a severe famine strikes the region, his brothers are forced to come to Egypt seeking food, and they unknowingly find themselves at the feet of the brother they betrayed. Yet instead of revenge, Joseph offers something unexpected: grace. He sees a greater purpose in the pain he endured, recognizing that while his brothers intended harm, God used their actions for good to save many lives. This is the heart of Genesis' message. Even when humanity chooses evil, God continues to work, redeeming the brokenness and turning it into something good. The story of Joseph shows us how God can bring light out of darkness. At the end of the story, we see that God's promise remains alive even amid human failure. He chooses this imperfect family to carry out His mission to restore the world. But this is only the beginning. The book of Genesis ends with an unanswered question: how exactly will God use this family to bring about ultimate redemption? And this question leads us beyond Genesis, into the broader narrative of the Bible, where God's plan unfolds across generations, ultimately culminating in the arrival of the one who will bring complete restoration. The story of Genesis shows us that despite humanity's failures, God remains faithful to his promise. It is in this faithfulness that we find our hope for the future. Thus, the first chapter of humanity's long journey comes to a close. The path laid out by Abraham and his descendants invites us to reflect on the nature of humankind, our flaws, our pride, and our tendency to pursue our own ways. Yet, amidst all of this, God never abandons his creation. The story of redemption begins with one man and one family, and will extend through generations, bringing forth a renewed hope for all. The promise made to Abraham echoes through time. From this flawed and dysfunctional family, God would ultimately bring forth the light that would restore the broken relationship between himself and humanity. And this promise resonates even today. God's plan continues, even when we don't understand it, even when things seem lost. Throughout history, human beings have often struggled to grasp the bigger picture. We can be quick to lose hope when things don't unfold the way we expect. Yet the story of Genesis teaches us something profound. God's timing and ways are not always obvious to us, but they are always good. Abraham and his descendants faced long periods of waiting. The promise was made, but its fulfillment didn't come immediately. In fact, generations would pass before the fullness of that promise became clear. Sometimes in our own lives we may find ourselves in seasons of waiting, wondering where God is and whether he's still working. Consider Sarah and Abraham again. For years they waited for the child God had promised, only to grow impatient and try to take matters into their own hands. We see this pattern again and again, not only in their lives but in our own as well. But through their mistakes, we learn that even when we stray from God's plan, his promise remains. He does not abandon his people even when they falter. It's easy to think that our failures, our imperfections, disqualify us from being part of God's story. But Genesis offers a different perspective. God doesn't choose perfect people. He chooses flawed, broken individuals and works through them. He uses the unlikely, the least expected, to fulfill his purposes. Think about Jacob, the deceiver, who stole his brother's birthright, or Joseph's brothers who betrayed him. These stories show us that God can take our worst decisions, our biggest mistakes, and still bring about something beautiful. In Joseph's own words, "You intended it for evil, but God intended it for good." There's a message of hope here for all of us. No matter how far we stray, no matter how many wrong turns we take, God can still bring good out of our brokenness. And this is where we see the brilliance of Genesis. It's not just about ancient history, it's a mirror reflecting the struggles of every human heart. We see ourselves in the impatience of Abraham, the jealousy of Joseph's brothers, the deception of Jacob. And yet, just as God remained faithful to them, he remains faithful to us. This faithfulness is key to understanding the entire Bible. The story of Genesis isn't isolated, it's the foundation upon which the rest of the scriptures are built. It's the beginning of a story that stretches through the ages, from Abraham to Moses, from David to Jesus, and even to us today. Every moment in the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, is connected by a common thread: God's unwavering desire to bring his creation back to him. What began as a promise to Abraham becomes the story of the whole world. The promise that through his family all the nations of the earth would be blessed is ultimately fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. And that's where the real depth of Genesis lies. It's not just a collection of stories, it's a story of redemption. Each twist, each turn is leading toward a greater fulfillment. The brokenness of humanity seen in Genesis is not the end of the story. It's merely the beginning of God's plan to heal the world. When we read Genesis today, we're invited to see ourselves in the story. Just as God walked with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, he walks with us. Their struggles and triumphs mirror our own, and their story is part of a larger narrative in which we also have a role. So, as we continue to explore the scriptures, remember that the story of Genesis is not merely a distant, ancient tale. It is a living story, and each of us is part of its unfolding. As we look ahead beyond the pages of Genesis, we will see how God's promises are fulfilled, how His love and mercy extend to all generations. From the garden to the patriarchs, from the flood to the promise, God's hand is always at work. The question for us today is not whether God is still working, but whether we are ready to trust His plan, even when we don't fully understand it. Just as He brought good out of the chaos in Genesis, He can bring good out of the chaos in our own lives. And so, the journey continues. From Genesis, we move forward in the grand narrative of the Bible, following the thread of God's faithfulness. It's a story of redemption that stretches through history, and it's a story that still has relevance for each of us today. Stay with us as we delve deeper into this incredible journey, a journey where we see that no matter how far we've fallen, God's love and His promises endure.